Hello, thank you for tuning in to read another story with me. Today we're going to be taking a look at a nonfiction text, and it's called Earthquakes, which is, I know, something that some of you have learned about in school and science class. Today we're going to read parts of this book. It's a pretty long book, so we don't have time to read all of it. And when we're done, I'm going to ask you to try and use some different nonfiction organizational ways that we could look at this book. So we're going to be looking at how we can organize information in this book by sequencing and in some different ways like that. So let's see if we can get started. We're going to be reading parts of Earthquakes, and this is written by Seymour Simon. The earth beneath our feet usually feels solid and firm, yet 1,000,000 times each year, an average of once every 30 seconds. It's a lot. Somewhere around the world, the ground shakes and sways. We call this an earthquake. Most earthquakes are too small to be noticed by people. Only sensitive scientific instruments record their passage. But hundreds of quakes every year are strong enough to change the face of the land. A medium-sized earthquake near Seattle, Washington, bent these railroad tracks into twisted ribbons of steel. A larger earthquake can cause enormous destruction. Check out those train tracks. Wow. On the morning of September 19th, 1985, a major earthquake struck Mexico City. It killed 10,000 people and injured another 20,000. Hundreds of buildings were destroyed, including homes and stores, hotels and hospitals, and schools and businesses. This multi-level parking garage collapsed like a house of cards, while some of the neighboring buildings suffered only slight damage. Do you see this? Some of this destruction here? So this parking garage wasn't built as soundly. The other buildings around it are okay. They're still up, but this one kind of completely collapsed. Wow. All right, now we're going to kind of get into the how earthquakes happen or why they happen. Most earthquakes take place in the Earth's crust, a 5 to 35 mile deep layer of rocks that covers the Earth. So our Earth is covered by about 5 miles, and some places it's as thick as 30 miles deep of just rocks. That's called the Earth's crust. Cracks in the rocks, called faults, run through the crust. The rocks on one side of a fault push against the rocks on the other side. So this graphic kind of helps illustrate this. These are the blocks at rest. They're not moving at all. See how there's a little line in the middle? That's called the fault. Stress builds up along the fault. Do you see how one part is moving this way? One part is moving this way. And when the energy is released, do you see how they start shaking and vibrating? That's what causes an earthquake. Let's keep reading. The rocks on one side of a fault push against the rocks on the other side, causing energy to build up. For years, friction will hold the rocks in place. But finally, like a stretched rubber band, the rocks suddenly snap past each other. The place where this happens is called the focus of an earthquake. It's right where the earthquake's focused on. From the focus, the energy of the quake speeds outward through the surrounding rocks in all directions. The shocks may last for less than a second for a small quake to several minutes for a major one. Weaker shocks, called aftershocks, can follow a quake on and off for days or weeks. Sections of the crust have slipped past each other along 2 fault lines and offset this ridge in Wyoming. Right here. This kind of sideways movement is called a strike-slip fault. Sometimes one side of a fault will slip higher than the other. This is what happened along this highway in the Mojave Desert of California. This kind of up and down movement is called a dip-slip fault. Wow. See how this kind of, wow. It's a lot of crazy changes there. So this kind of sequenced the events of what causes an earthquake to happen, right? They were using sequencing to organize this information, to go from the beginning of an earthquake all the way down to the end of an earthquake. So it started with the plates being next to each other, right? Then stress built up for years and years and years, but they were still held in place because of the friction. And then finally they just snap past each other. That causes the energy to release. That's the focus. And then the energy spread out among the rocks, and that's what we feel as the earthquake. So it kind of sequenced or went through all the different steps of an earthquake. That's a really cool way to organize this information. We're going to read a couple more pages from this book. So, 4 out of 5 of the world's earthquakes take place along the rim of the Pacific Ocean, a zone called the Pacific Ring of Fire. Alaska, California, Mexico, the west coast of Central and South America, and the east coast of China, Japan, and New Zealand are all located within the Pacific Ring of Fire. Another major earthquake zone stretches through Italy, Greece, and Turkey to the Middle East and into Asia. In the United States, almost half of the quakes each year occur in Southern California. In other sections of the United States, earthquakes are rare. About the only places that have never recorded an earthquake are the southern parts of Florida, Alabama, and Texas. So if you look at this map, this is a really cool graphic that's giving us some great information. The place where it's yellow is where there have never been any damage from an earthquake. So this part of Texas, Alabama, and Florida. Minor damage has happened where it's been green. Ooh, that's where Pennsylvania is. So are we at risk for great damage from an earthquake? Probably not. Most of the earthquakes that happen in Pennsylvania, we don't even feel. The parts where it's blue, there's moderate damage from an earthquake. And then the parts that are red is where there's, or purple, are where there's major damage from an earthquake. And Southern California is where the most major damage happens. So that's kind of lucky for us. We don't live in a place where there's a lot. Why do most earthquakes in the United States occur in California? The answer lies deep within the earth. Ooh, this is another way that we can organize nonfiction stories. They started with a question, and now they're going on to the answer. Why does it happen? And then they give us the answer after it. That's a great way to kind of organize thoughts in nonfiction. The Earth's solid rocky crust floats on the mantle, an 1,800-mile thick layer of very heavy melted rock that moves up and down and around. Over the years, these movements have cracked the crust like an eggshell into a number of huge pieces called plates. The plates float slowly about on the mantle, up to 4 inches a year, so not a lot. As the plates move, they run into or pull away from each other, producing enormous strains in the rock along their edges. The United States and Canada are riding on the North American plate, which is slowly moving into the Pacific plate. The colliding plates are what causes most of the earthquakes along the West Coast. But earthquakes can occur anywhere there are stresses in underlying rocks. Now this graphic kind of shows all of the different plates. Here's where we are in North America. And when the plates go up against each other, that can cause an earthquake to happen too. So here's the North American plate and the Pacific plate. And along the faults are where earthquakes can happen. And this graphic says, the map shows the plates in the Earth's crust. The red dots indicate places where earthquakes have occurred. So there's a lot along these faults here. So we just learned a lot of really great information from this story, Earthquakes. I'm glad that you were able to kind of think about how this text was organized. My literacy challenge for today is, can you sequence the events that cause an earthquake to happen? If you need to rewind so you can kind of hear me read some of this again, that's totally fine. If you need to research it a little bit more so you can find out more information, that's fine too. But could you sequence all the different events that cause an earthquake to happen? And you're taking the text structure from this story and you're kind of replicating it yourself. Try and use some sequencing words while you're doing it, like first, then, next, last, after that, secondly, finally. Those might be good words for you to use. Thank you for tuning in for this story. I hope you do a good job trying to organize your ideas, and I hope you tune back in for more stories with me. Have a good day. Bye.